A editora Tigres de Papel e a Ciclo-Oficina dos Anjos juntaram esforços e trouxeram finalmente para português um clássico da arquitetura e do desenho urbano. Life Between Buildings, ou A Vida Entre os Edifícios, como ficou traduzido, é um dos livros mais importantes escritos nas últimas décadas sobre como se deve lidar com o espaço público. Temos o privilégio de ter em Lisboa o arquiteto Jan Gehl, que escreveu este livro como a sua tese de doutoramento em 1971 e que tem um dos trabalhos escritos e construídos mais interessantes por todo o mundo, sobretudo em matéria de espaço público, porque tem conseguido fazer a ligação entre a disciplina da arquitetura e do planeamento e, por outro lado, todas as ciências sociais, da psicologia à economia e à geografia. Thank you for visiting Lisbon, Jan, and thank you for your interview. I would start with a very personal question.
Okay.
So, I heard you are married to a psychologist. How did that change your views on architecture and urban design?
Yeah, that was very important because I was very young and just out of School of Architecture, and we were completely trained in a technocratic way, autistic, looking at the physical forms. And then through my wife and her profession of psychology and her friends, I sort of got an opening, a window to another way of looking at things. And we had all these discussions that why are architects not, why don't they teach the architecture students anything about people in School of Architecture? And we realized there was a big gap between the social sciences and the architecture and planning professions. Though everything we did in the physical world influenced the quality of life for people, and we knew nothing about how this manipulation was actually carried out. So that was really a good reason to study this, and that was the start of my study of this area. Also, my wife worked in this field for quite a while in the Danish Building Research Institute, where she wrote a very famous book about the psychology of housing. What would be the demand for housing?
Okay, so it's usually said by designers, build it and they will come. Build it and people will come. But it seems that just designing and building isn't enough. Is there more to the design process?
Oh, certainly. I would even say that yesterday in my presentation I showed two squares. One where all the quality criteria had been looked after, and the other one where miraculously out of 12, 13 were overlooked. And the difference in the way these two places were used were that there were always 10 times more people on the good one as compared to the other one. Though both of them had the same, I think there was 8,000 people going through these places, both of them, but there were 10 times more people stopping here than here. Actually, they never stopped in the poor one. They ran out of the place as fast as they could. So the way we design the details, how we invite people, that has an enormous influence on how things are used. In America, they have something called a walkability score, where they can look at a neighborhood and see how walkable it is. But now I think also it's important to realize we should have a sittable score.
Sittable.
Yeah, and we talk about sticky places. That means a place which is so nice that you can't really get through without sitting and enjoying it. Also, a good place would be a place which is the destination by its own right. So you come from all over the city to have breakfast there or to have coffee there. That's the opposite of having a place where you run out as fast as you can.
Okay.
And that can be done through design, really.
So how do you study? How can designers watching this interview start studying in a structured and rigorous way the life between buildings, specific places? You know, is feeling the space enough, or do you have to use methods?
Together with one of my PhD students, I have written a book called How to Study Public Life. And in this one, which first we did this Cities for People, which were supposed to sum up everything I found out and knew about in all my studies in 45 years. But then I was asked to do another book about what are the methods you use to find out all these things. So we have put all this down in a book where you can find everything. How to study public life. It's come out in a number of 10 languages.
So we'll have to get it in Portuguese.
Chinese and Japanese and Romanian,
So
all the major languages.
So we need a Portuguese edition. That's what you're saying.
Of course.
Of course. So, and can you design for people without involving people in the design process? Is public participation indispensable to good public space design?
Well, that was a good question to put to me, because I have never done too much in that direction. Most of the stuff I have written about is based on observation. And that is, of course, good architectural tools. We learned in our study how to measure buildings and how to record physical environments. And this training in measuring, I've actually applied to measure people or to observe. Sometimes I think that observation is better than talking to people. But other things you have to talk with people to know about. And I think a combination, but you could learn a fantastic amount of things just by observing, just by watching and systematizing your observations.
Okay. And often when we are changing...
Maybe I could mention that sometimes, you have to be very specific when you do work with participation. If you're not very specific and you say, what do you want? Everybody would say, we want more trees, because trees are well known and that is good and green is good. So trees we want. What I think is very important in participation processes, that is to inform people properly about what do they do in other places, what can you do to such a space, so that they can see what a fantastic range of options there are, instead of these standard more sunshine and more trees, whatever. A child can never wish for Christmas presents something they've not heard about. So we must make sure that the people in this society, that they know about what is out there, what the other ones, what are the best examples in the world. Then we can have a discussion. Can you see some of these as something you could use in your neighborhood? Then it gets a very valuable discussion about this and that and that. Then suddenly you talk.
Great. Well, in very car-oriented cities, it's when we start talking about change, quickly differences come up and emerge. And it's impossible to change and at the same time make everyone happy. And sometimes to show that new solutions work, we have to implement them without consensus. How does that make you feel?
First I would say that I worked with cities now for 30 years. And of course it came about, I did a lot of studies, I gave a lot of talks about what we found and said that the architects were stupid and the planners were stupid and the politicians were stupid. You can do that as an academic. You have a free speech. You can sort of say, hey, why didn't you do that? But then the mayor started to come and say, hey, you can criticize, but can't you come and show what we should do here instead of just writing all these books and having these talks? And that was the beginning of a long career of being advisor to cities, and I worked in this for 30 years, and I don't recall any place where they didn't start by saying, we know that this and this has happened here and there, but you must realize it can never happen here because we are different in Portugal, or we are different in England, or we're different here. And then when we did the changes based on knowledge of Homo sapiens, and made good places, then we found that they were just as other Homo sapiens in other parts. And then they couldn't remember who said it would never happen here. I remember in New York, when we started there, some people was coming right away from the start saying, you must realize that your funny little European ideas would never work in the Big Apple because we are awake 24 hours a day, and this is a big melting pot. This is America, and this is New York. You can never use. Then, say we changed, or we were helping to change Times Square, and suddenly they were behaving like Italians on Times Square, and it was an instant success. And also Times Square is interesting because the Times Square, the closing of Broadway on Times Square and other squares, that was an experiment. The mayor said, don't worry, it's an experiment. But half a year later, he came out and said, experiment? No way, it's one of the best successes in recent American planning history. It will stay. So many times, these things, many of the good things I've seen, they start as experiment. Let's try to close this for Christmas and whatever. And then gradually we learn about it, and then maybe even people start to demand more of this good stuff.
Yeah, it's funny because really people from warmer countries tend to say it won't work here because it's hot. And people from colder countries say it won't work here because it's colder. It only works for the others, right?
Yeah. But having worked and studied from one end of the world to the other, I've got a very solid belief that we are all Homo sapiens. We have the same biological history. We are walking animals. Our body is made for walking. Our senses are made for walking. And all our social life happens when we are on our feet, whatever. We have to get down from the elephant to start to make love. And so we have the same preconditions, the body, whether we are in Africa or South America or in Christchurch, New Zealand, or in Japan, or in Greenland, where I've also worked. We are basically Homo sapiens, and then there are certain differences depending on climate, and topography and culture can also play a role. But also I worked in a number of Arab countries and found that they are also Homo sapiens down there. And when you do something nice, they will know how to use it.
Okay. An important idea that you share in your book is that, and I quote, everyday life, ordinary situations, and spaces in which daily life is lived must form the center of attention and effort. And when we look at public space programs in many cities, they always go for the big plazas, for the big places. And it seems that in the neighborhoods, things tend to remain the same. They want to go for the big whale. So what's your comment on why not start with the big central places then?
Or do both. It's obvious that it's so easy to see a big park or to see a stadium with 100,000 people looking at football. And so it will be easy to discuss and to define these big projects. But the majority of everything happens as part of the daily life. And that is one of the benefits of really having studied and observed and spent days and days and days in ordinary streets, just seeing what's happening on the sidewalks, how people meet, how conversations develop, how the old people can get across the street, and all these things. And I think that I had recently a discussion in Toronto where they are going to do a lot with parks. And I said, do you know that for every 1 hour you spend in a park, you spend maybe 20 hours in other places? Shouldn't we look at where you spend the 20 hours first and then look at the parks later on? Of course, you can look at both things, but I think that in a city like Toronto or like this one, it's very important to look at where the people are and improve the situation from that they are there. This is a daily day. They could rightfully expect good quality for their daily day things. So it's a very good thing to start where people are, where the daily day things are working out. And then you can add the parks and the stadiums and the cultural houses. Fine.
You also said a good public realm is a crucial factor for good public transportation. Why is that?
That has to do with the fact that normally, of course, there's this notion that you have the car and it parked at the side of your bed, and you roll out of the bed and roll into the car, and then you go into another place, and there's no walking involved at all. But given the fact that we cannot expand the automobile world, and actually it is declining now. There are many signs around the world that car driving is going down, and we have endless many recommendations from the World Health Organization, or from the climate people, and also from studies of people in cities, that it is very important that we change our habit of movement. And in this change, I see that public transportation will have an increasing role. It is already found out that while automobile driving is slightly going down, what is going up is use of public transportation and also bicycling around the world. And the public transportation normally involves that you should get to the bus stop or to the station and get back again. And that's why having a wonderful neighborhood, I would use Venice as an example. They have very nice neighborhoods where it's good to be a child, and it's good for many things. The bridges make it a little bit difficult for the elderly people to get around, but wonderful neighborhood. And then they have the water bus stop really nearby. So the walking through the neighborhood is part of your every journey, and that walk should be delightful and pleasurable, and that is strongly recommended by the health people, that you walk 1 hour every day, or you bicycle 1 hour every day. So I can see that if we have great neighborhoods and great public transportation systems, they are brothers and sisters.
Okay.
And actually, I was asked to answer to some students some viewpoint about the future and give them some advice. And I said, what you should not do is Dubai. Dubai is modernism and motorism in extreme form. What you should do and aim for in the future is Venice without bridges and plus bicycles, and with a fabulous metro underneath where you can bring your bicycles. That will give you a very good mobility and a very good life.
Okay.
Also your kids and your grandmother.
Actually, about kids, fear of traffic and crime are generally stated by adults as the reasons to stop children from freely using the streets without adult supervision. And we see less and less children alone in the street or in groups of children. Is this a problem, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, it is a problem. And of course, I wouldn't know all the things you should do. I know that people would say about Copenhagen that we must have a baby boom in Copenhagen, because when you go around in Copenhagen, you see so many children. They are not necessarily on their own, but they are very much on the sidewalks, and they are very much on the bicycles and in the cargo bikes. And also, one of the recent things in Copenhagen is that they work with continuous sidewalks, that never stop a sidewalk on an important street just because a side street is running into it. Just take the sidewalk across, and then the car from the side street will have to go up on the sidewalk and look to all sides. And that means that my grandchildren, who are 7, they can now walk all the way to school because they can stay on the sidewalk from the door to the school.
Right.
And that means that a 7-year-old can walk to school on her own instead of having to cross 4 streets. That is not an option.
Reducing parking spaces is often labeled as a bad thing for shops and for local commerce. What, from your experience, is this true?
There are so many studies made that there is no direct link between parking spaces and turnover. And generally, if the quality of the environment goes up, so there are more reasons for people to come there and to linger there and stay there and walk by the shops, then that is a very important factor, which is maybe more important than the parking spaces. There is a fantastic misconception between what the shopkeepers think and what people do. Shopkeepers think that most of their customers come by car, and if you check it, most of the people come by bus or by walking or by bicycle or other ways than cars. And if they come by cars, their car may be parked 3 streets away or something like that.
From your experience, and here's a simple question, can walking and cycling reduce urban congestion?
I'm quite sure that say, like in Amsterdam and Copenhagen, where we have a very lively bicycle culture, that means that there are many journeys which are not being made by car. And of course, that will relieve the congestion. And in my city of Copenhagen, you will see very few congestions at all, because there is this culture that other things are just as good for your transportation.
You said bicycles are fast pedestrians. What are the implications of this concept for the design of public space?
Yeah, we call the pedestrians and the bicycling the soft traffic, whatever. But there are many similarities between bicycling and walking. That is that you are moving so slowly that you can use your senses, you can see other people, you can be seen, you are present in the street as a person and not as a chunk of steel. So really, we can also talk about the people running or jogging. They are doing the same speed as bicycles. So it is people who can use their senses. Also, of course, we have noticed that it's very easy to change. If you're bicycling, you can jump off anywhere and start to socialize if you meet a friend, or you can jump off and do your shopping. It's much easier to get rid of your bicycle than it is to find a car parking space. So it's been found that bicyclists can be very good customers in shops because it's so easy on the way home to stop a number of places and buy the right things.
By the way, you said bikes can give fantastic freedom to children, and you mentioned about riding a bike to have dinner on your 45th wedding anniversary. So, can all ages cycle in the city?
If the bicycle infrastructure is carefully done, and then it is also a safe bicycle system. And then, of course, we know from my hometown that when children are 5, they are freely taken with their parents all over the place. And when they are 12, they are generally allowed to go to sports and to go to friends, whatever. And also elderly people, I could mention my wife. She's had some years ago a stroke, and she is not driving anymore. But she has a fantastic mobility now on her bike, where she can go all over Copenhagen in her age of 78. And she drags the bike through the difficult crossings as a safety precaution. But then we have many special bike routes where you don't have any crossings and whatever. So that gives her mobility, even if she cannot drive. And I think it's very important, these before the automobile age and after the automobile driving age, that you have mobility beyond just walking and the public transportation.
How can European cities learn from each other and replicate measures to promote safe and active travel? What would be your advice to European cities who want to improve?
Yeah. I think that it's so important that at this stage in development, you don't have to be a pioneer, because there are so many interesting examples of cities who have done this or done that or done that. And we have a very free exchange of information. I know from Copenhagen that they have every year 400 delegations of mayors and city planners from all over the world who come to see how they do the city planning. And I will generally recommend traveling and talking, seeing the things directly and talking with the people who have done it, and get inspired and informed by seeing best practice in where these various things are to be seen. So that we have that possibility, and I think that's a wonderful thing.
So any final word of advice for Lisbon, for the residents of Lisbon, and especially for the walking and bike advocacy people in Lisbon?
Yesterday I mentioned that all my books are translated into Chinese, but I fear they'd not have time to read them. Whatever I know is in my various books, of which 3 of them are now in Portuguese. So I hope you have time to read them.
Fica o conselho, A Vida Entre os Edifícios. Foi a entrevista com o Jan Gehl. Jan, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
And do come back.